Well, good morning. We'll be continuing on in Genesis 42 today. And probably get through at least half of 43, I'm hoping. Or I'm sorry, we're in 41. So, and let's go ahead and read 41 verses 37 to the end of the chapter. And so we're going to pick up, last week we talked about Pharaoh's dreams and then Joseph's interpretation, and this just picks up right after the interpretation. And part of the interpretation was also a directive of what to do. And last week we had talked about it's likely that God gave Joseph the insight not only to interpret the dream, but to add that the things that Egypt should do to be successful. So starting with verse 37, now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put the gold necklace around his neck. He had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, bow the knee, and he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall rise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphenath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. Now before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. He named the second Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. When the 7 years of plenty, which had been in the land of Egypt, came to an end, the 7 years of famine began to come. Just as Joseph had said, then there was famine in all the lands. But in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, you shall do. When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. Let's turn to the Lord in prayer. Father, these are your words, and make us wise. Make us wise to understand these things, and bless us, I pray, with that knowledge that you would have us learn. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, well, I was not really sure where I left off last week, but I think I left off around verse 40. 40? Anyone else remember? If not, I'll just start there. Okay, so 40 to 42. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put the gold necklace around his neck. So there's three things here that he does to make Joseph official. he gives him his ring. Now, in this context, that ring was used as a way of sealing documents, right? You'd pour a little bit of wax and you put the ring in it, and that was Pharaoh's signature. So by giving Joseph that, Joseph was able to sign decrees as if he was the Pharaoh. The gold chain was also a part of his office, so it's likely he took his own necklace off and put it on Joseph. And then the fine clothes is just, remember, he was down in the jail, he was in the dungeon, he shaved to be presentable, and he put on some clean clothes. But that was just to make him presentable. This was to make him regal, and so as if he was Pharaoh, or second in command. And then verse 43, he had him ride in a second chariot, his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, bow the knee. So this wasn't just a backroom deal where he would be secretly signing documents and the mover behind the throne, right? But he was publicly proclaimed as, this is my right hand. He is going to be doing all the things. And then 44, moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission, no one shall raise his hand or foot in the land of Egypt. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Sound like Potiphar and the jailer? You know what? I'm just going to take a vacation from my job. You just do everything. I'll just be here to back you up. So, once again, Joseph is blessed by God. Whether, we talked last week, whether in 37 and 38 there was a period of time where Pharaoh and the officials were meeting to try to determine who is the person and should we do what Joseph has said or not. Regardless, they get to the point where Pharaoh says, I'm going to let you do all these things. And again, we don't really know with the jailer and with Potiphar how quickly was that transition of recognizing that God blessed everything he did. In this case, it doesn't seem like there might have been some deliberation, but when the decision was made, there wasn't like, well, we're going to put you over a little bit and then a little bit more. It was, we only got 7 years, so go ahead, Joseph, do what you think you need to do. And it's a good thing too, right? All right. Then Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zephanath-Paneah, which has the meaning of revealer of secret things. And then he gives him the wife of Asenath, the daughter of the priest of On, and the priest of On was named Potiphar. So again, this is kind of one of those things where we see a little bit of a culture clash, a little bit of a misunderstanding of what is God, who is God. So it's clear that Joseph had a clear testimony. Everyone knew that he was blessed by God. And so what does Potiphar do? Well, you need a wife. Let me find one of high standing among our cults. Because that will be good for you, right? She's a woman of faith. So we're never really told what happens with this Asenath. Did she come to believe in the one true God? Did Joseph have a testimony before her? I think the answer to the second question is definitely yes. But we don't know what his house was like. Was there still idol worship there? The Bible is silent on that. So I don't think we should necessarily speculate. It's just silent. So just calling that out. And then verses 46 to 49. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. So a couple things there. We're going to see in the next chapter that Joseph is placed over the distribution of the grain, right? But the grain is ultimately stored in multiple cities. So Joseph had other people who answered to him. He couldn't be in every city all at once. And travel wasn't quite like it is today, right? He couldn't spend the 2 hours in one city and then jet set to the next city and spend 2 hours there and jet set to the next one and spend an hour and a half. And the market was only open for a small period of the day. I don't think he personally did that, but it was under his care. How much grain do you think this was that they stored? I mean, when he told Pharaoh, it's going to be really bad, but it's going to be really good first. Let's take a fifth. I don't know about you guys, but I struggle with that math a little bit. Do you? Says they couldn't even measure it. But so did they store only a fifth? I mean, that's one of my questions. Where did they store it? Did they have just a bunch of empty storehouses? Did they get the builders out and build really fast? Or did they just pile it on the ground somewhere? I mean, some of these things logistically thinking through, how did they guard it? I don't know all these things, but it makes me wonder. You know, there's a lot to say, and if it was so difficult to measure, maybe it was difficult to measure in every city. Again, logistically, how did they do that?
Jill?
Yes?
I don't know, it made me think, what an amazing man Joseph really must have been.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in charge of organizing all
Yeah.
of this. And
Yeah. Now, there is a part of this that I think sometimes we overlook. So Joseph is put in charge of everything. What's the first thing Joseph does? He announces, hey, everybody, you know the taxes you've been paid that you probably complain about? We're going to add 20% for the next 7 years. May not have been a popular thing. I mean, if you just think about that politically, right? Hey, I'm going to tax you all an extra 20%, and you're welcome. We just read over this, and we don't necessarily see that political angle. So I don't know if Joseph would have been popular. Certainly, the evidence of what he was doing would have been very significant. The people would have recognized year after year as the grain started to mount up and become unmeasurable. There may have been a few who doubted, what's this guy about? But he had the authority of Pharaoh. He had the command of the army. And again, it's a good thing that he did, which we'll see in the next chapter.
The thing that stands out to me, Joel, is, if you think back about Joseph's life, he was put in charge of Potiphar's home and all that, right? But that's a small scale compared to this, right? And,
Yep.
And so he really has no direct experience and say this is just because he was just so intelligent that he could figure out that. It's clearly God.
Right.
Right. And that's what stands out is that Joseph could not have logically thought through all the logistics of all this on his own without just God giving him that wisdom to do so. That's what is the amazing part of the story.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. For those, in case any didn't hear, clearly Joseph was an intelligent man. Clearly he was a ambitious man, or one that was very productive. But ultimately God is giving him the wisdom here. Because there's a lot to this that, if you think of just the logistics of collecting all this and protecting it, and I don't know, maybe God kept the grain safe. I think typically we don't pile grain up for 7 years in the sunlight because the sunlight breaks down food, and plus the insects and other things, the rain, get to it. So, regardless, yeah, God gave him the wisdom that he needed. Anything else? Yeah, Howard.
You wonder what Pharaoh was thinking, 7 years of abundance. All this was basically based on the dream that he had.
Yeah.
You wonder what he would be thinking. Is that dream a reality, or what was that all about?
Yeah, you wonder if things were so good during those 7 years that nobody really cared. It was just like the roaring 20s, nothing's going to go wrong, it's all going to be great. Or, yeah, politically too. Well, we're going to hang this guy out to dry. He's going to introduce this 20% tax, and maybe by year 6, the people, the officials and everyone were like talking to Pharaoh, and what are we going to do about this? This doesn't look so good. What happens year 8 if we don't have that famine? I don't know, yeah. But yeah, all based on a dream that created one night of insomnia. I mean, really.
Well, that's also making an assumption that they weren't taxed to begin with. I mean, they very well could have just some tax.
Possibly. I think it was in addition to whatever tax was already there. I think whatever tax was there, they added 20%. So if the marginal tax rate for the wealthy was 25%, it was now 45%. If that's what they had, put it in today's terms, right?
Where does it talk about the tax? I'm not seeing it.
It doesn't talk about the tax, but he gathered a fifth of the grain.
That's verse 34 and 41.
Verse 34, it says, "Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact a fifth of the produce of the land of the Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. And let them gather all the food of these years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it." So it's possible it only affect the farmers, right? So what's happening today, right? They're passing a gas tax in Europe, right? And they're all getting in their tractors and blocking all the all the roads. Again, I'm not sure that the 20% would have applied to everyone, but it's likely at this time it's not like our world today where 90% of people don't live on farms, right? Most people in this time lived on farms. And so it would have been the majority of the population that was subject to this 20% gathering. I'm calling it a tax. I mean, it could be, you could look at it as something else, but.
I would think that the first year would be the hardest, like getting them on board with it.
Yeah.
The actual abundance, but once, if it was beyond what they've ever seen.
Well,
You're going to have this fifth, I'm still more than I had last year.
And it's also possible Joseph had the wisdom given by God that he didn't announce the 20% to the public until it was clear that the harvest was going to be just extremely abundant. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
But then does it say later on that the Egyptians had to pay for it, which is that seems kind of awful. Tax them and then say, oh, sorry, you're not going to pay taxes to get it.
Yeah, it does in the distribution. Yeah. So Corinne's going ahead to 55. So when the land was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, you shall do it." And when the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. So, I mean, I think some of that could have been, there may have been decrees to say, hey, store up for yourself, because when the years of plenty are over, you're going to have to buy the grain that we've stored. But I don't know. There's no evidence that there was major upheaval. People were hungry and they ate, and they survived. Yeah, a lot of political things going on there, though. So I just want us to, I guess, just to call that out and make of it what you will. All right, so then verse 50. Now before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On, were born to him. So if Joseph was 30 when he came before Pharaoh, and these were born before he was before the 7 years of plenty were over, Joseph's sons would have been born between probably the ages of 31 and 37 for Joseph. And then verse 51, Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. So it just makes me wonder, so he named him Manasseh, and I think this is a true statement. He is at this time super duper busy, and he doesn't have time to think about the life that was left behind when he was sold. So God has made him forget his trouble. I don't think that necessarily means he completely forgot, but that he has forgotten his trouble, because he's busy and he's in the right place at the right time. It makes me wonder too if this first child was born like immediately. I wonder if it was several years after that first meeting with Potiphar, or not Potiphar, but with Pharaoh. And then 52, he named the second son Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Now both of these names would have been Egyptian names, and what I read is, so the Egyptian names sounded like Hebrew words that would have had these meanings, I think is the way we're meant to understand this. So Manasseh didn't necessarily mean anything in Egyptian, but it sounded like a word in Hebrew that meant to forget. And then Ephraim sounded like a word in Hebrew that means fruitful or twice. As best we can tell. All right, and then 53 to 55, when the 7 years of plenty had come, 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said. Then there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says you shall do. And I'll just read 56 and 57. When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. So for sure, this was not just Egypt, but it went beyond its borders. Now, to the person writing this, it was all the earth that they knew. And to the person hearing it, it would have been all the earth they knew. But would it have been the whole globe? I don't know that. I don't know that we can read into that, because it's clear that people from other areas surrounding Egypt came to Egypt for food. But they didn't traverse oceans or other things. At least I don't think. But regardless, it was, we can take from this that the famine, the drought was so significant, it covered a lot of land. All right, any thoughts before we take a break from Joseph here for just a few verses? Yeah.
I was just thinking they must have, at least hopefully, they were good stewards of the money that they had been given during that 7 years, since they had to go and buy grain from.
Yeah, you would hope so. I'm sure Joseph probably directed the people to say, hey, these are going to be good years. Not only am I going to gather a little bit more, but be prepared for the 7 years following, right? I don't.
They were better savers than.
Right.
State.
But were there some Egyptians who said, oh, that Joseph, he's taxing me and he's telling me what to do. I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I'm sure there were some. Yeah, Shannon.
If they were good planners, though, it still didn't go well. We'll be reading shortly.
Yeah.
Joseph first takes their money, then he takes their land and their animals, and then that. I mean, they all become subject to the Pharaoh.
Right. Yeah, I think there was. However it was done, to Shannon's point, yeah, there was military control at this point. All right, last week we did mention, so we're going to go back to Jacob. Now, depending on how you do the math, Jacob was either 91 when he had Joseph, or he was 74. It depends on how you do the math. But the 91 seems a little less problematic to me, because we know in verse 42:28. Later on, it mentions that when Jacob moves to Egypt, he's 130 years old, and he dies at 147. So I'm just going to go on the assumption. I think the better math is that Joseph was born to Jacob when he was 91. So if Joseph is now 37 when the famine starts, that means Jacob is 128, right? So just keep that in mind. And his brothers would have been in their 40s at this point. So reading on in the Bible here, verses 42, 1-2. Now Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another?" He said, "Behold, I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place, so that we may live and not die." So the order here seems a little bit weird. Jacob sees that there is grain in Egypt. And then in verse 2, he tells his sons, "I've heard." I think it would maybe be the other way around, but they're staring at one another, wondering what they're going to eat. And they see people walking by their tents with grain on their camels or horses or donkeys or whatever. And the logical thing would be to go out and say, "Where'd you get the grain?" Right? So was Jacob the only one in the household who knew that there was grain in Egypt? I don't think so, but he's the head of the household. Now again, if we think back to Jacob's father and his grandfather, there was famine in the land for Abraham and Isaac, wasn't there? Where did they go when there was famine in the land? They went to the land of the Philistines, right? To King Abimelech. And makes me wonder, either this famine was so bad it was affecting that part of the land, so that's to the south and the east of the main part of Israel where the Philistines were, kind of probably the land of Gaza today. And at that time, presumably during famines, that was the place to go because there was more water there. There was some of that lake effect or sea effect from the Mediterranean Sea that they'd have more greenery than the heart of the land. It's likely that the famine was severe there. I also wonder, had Abimelech died? And so now there was not the chance for them to go. Because if you recall, when Abraham went and when Isaac went, the people didn't like the Israelites, right? They complained and they argued with them. And it was Abimelech who made peace treaties with them and told his people to settle down. So just a thing on the side. I don't know if that occurs to all of you, but in this case, that's not something they're considering. It is, well, people are getting grain from Egypt, so go there. And so it appears they didn't have an option, is my guess, one way or another. Now, at this point, it would have been 20 years since Joseph was sold into slavery. And so verses 3 and 4, then 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, I'm afraid that harm may befall him. So whatever age Benjamin was at this point, he was older than Joseph, right? Been 20 years. So Benjamin's likely in his 20s, if not his early 30s. The 10 go. There's no complaining, right? How come Benjamin's not coming? They accept their father's direction, which I'm just going to call that out. We're going to see that over and over. It seems like whatever animosity that was in those 10 brothers around Jacob's favoritism towards Joseph, they had either come to terms with it or Jacob had gotten better about his favoritism. But make no mistake, Benjamin is his favorite, right? But we don't get any sort of grumbling or complaining. That's not, at least it's not in the narrative. So then verse 5, so the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. And I just have the question of, it's not recorded, but it's a multi-day trip to go to Egypt. Did any of the brothers think about, or did they even talk about the direction they were going and that they were walking the same path that Joseph would have gone in chains? Or however he traveled when he was sold to slavery, right? I think regardless, we're going to see that it comes to a head here. I'm not going to get there today. It comes to a head, and they're going to refer back to Joseph, and they're going to say that their guilty conscience is going to come out. So I'm going to leave off here, but it seems like as they're going to Egypt, it's likely they would have thought some of that. I'm not going to leave off here. Let's read a few more. Verse 6. Now Joseph was the ruler over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he disguised himself to them and spoke to them harshly. And he said to them, "Where have you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." But Joseph had recognized his brothers, although they did not recognize him. Joseph remembered the dreams which he had had about them. So I wonder what this disguise was. I don't know how much Joseph would have had to disguise himself. He's wearing different raiment. He doesn't have, now let's face it, he was 17. How much of a beard do you have when you're 17? So if it was normal for the Canaanites and his family to have beards, his beard would not have been significant, but he would have also matured. But regardless, my guess is he saw them in the line, and if he had to make other things to disguise himself, he did so. They did not recognize him. He recognized them. And then we get this idea of Joseph remembered the dreams which he had had about them. There's that idea back in verse 51 of the last chapter. Joseph names his firstborn Manasseh because God has made him forget the troubles of his youth. And then he remembers his dream. How much had he forgotten, and how much did this bring it all back? I don't know. Go ahead, Shauna.
Well, if you're naming your kid, I've forgotten, or whatever, well,
Yeah.
you have remembered because you're naming your kid that. But I think it's more like, I'm not holding a grudge or something.
It could be, or it could be that I'm no longer dwelling on it because I don't have time. And I think that possibly gives us some insight to his mindset too. When he was in jail, whatever amount of time that was, he had a lot of time to think. And in his new position, he doesn't have a lot of time to dwell on that. And part of it too is his situation has vastly improved, right? It's nice to be where he is now compared to being in jail. Yeah. But yeah, there's that idea of he remembered his dream. So I kind of get the impression from that, maybe it's not a daily thought that he's got about how's that dream going to come true. But he is in a place because of the dreams he's interpreted. So, I don't know that, it could also be that he just called it to mind. But we'll leave it at that. I'll let you chew on that, and we'll go into his dealing with his family next week. And let's close in prayer. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for what we see in Joseph's life here, how you provide, how you are in the events of world events, and that the things you do to bless those you have chosen oftentimes spill over and bless those who do not believe in you, but have the ability to believe if they would just stop rebelling. Lord, I just pray that we'd be lights in our community. I pray that we would be like Joseph, always willing and able to share that we are your people and that it's you that blesses us, and it's not the fruit of our own labor that causes the blessing. Lord, I just pray that you bless our time of worship as we continue and make it worthy in your sight and pleasing